Welcome everybody. I am the air quotes comedian, and despite the title being Gag Gag, this isn't a deconstruction of the patriarchal misogyny of the cartoon series Popeye, is it? I mean, that would be completely ridiculous. No, this is about something else. This being the Polemics podcast. Welcome. Popeye the Sailor Man. Probably never hit a deer in his car. Every time I drive anywhere, I see all kinds of animals, dead, on the roadside. I suspect most people just drive by the roadkill and don't give a fuck. But I see a dead deer and I wonder about their life. I imagine Mrs. Doe coming home after a hard day's work, plonking down her briefcase and loosening her tie, perhaps having a nice cup of herbal tea before announcing to her family that she's going to do some prancing around the busy highway as a way of kicking back for the evening. Rest assured, children, she says, nothing bad will happen as I prance around the asphalt populated exclusively by mechanized death machines. But, oh no, she doesn't return home later that night. Her family phone the police to report her missing and then organise a search party. One of her daughters finds her eviscerated carcass laying on the side of the highway. "Daddy, she's over here. Mummy's dead, Daddy, and all these cunts are driving past in their cars like nothing dreadful has happened." In my time, I have hit precisely one deer. I was under the speed limit by a considerable margin and even had time to stomp on the brakes before I broadsided the beast. Thunk! And it disappeared into the bushes. My first thought was, fuck, I hope the deer isn't too badly injured. I hope she's well enough to return to her village and raise a posse to come and vigilante my attempted murdering arse. You'll note that my first thought wasn't, well, I wonder if I can finagle the insurance deductible by reorganising my meagre assets in order to effect repairs to the business end of my damaged vehicle while also preparing for a sharp rise in my premiums. People often ask me, Patrick, why do you carry a small tin of cat food around with you everywhere you go? To which I respond, well, what if I came across a hungry cat during the course of my day and I didn't have any cat food for it? Then where would I be? I'd be the guy looking at a hungry cat with no food to give it, and that would make me the arsehole in that scenario, wouldn't it? What I'm saying, right, in the most concise and least funny way I can manage, is that I'm an animal lover. Not, in the biblical sense. That would be immoral and even illegal in some US states. No, I'm certainly not the kind of person who would smear his genitals with peanut butter when he was 13 years old and have his auntie's schnauzer lick it all off. That isn't a thing I did, and even if I did, I certainly wouldn't broadcast it on a public social media platform. So, an animal lover, and as I've said before, I'm also vegan. Now, I'm not the world's best vegan, right? I'm not like that one girl I saw on the internet who, and I'm not making this shit up, she said, "I'm a vegan, I eat meat, deal with it." Pregnant pause. Shit, that cue was for me, I wasn't supposed to say it. I mean, a statement like that just beggars belief. I'm an anarchist, I love hierarchical systems of oppression, deal with it. I'm a Nazi, I love Jews, deal with it. I live in Basildon, I don't want to kill myself, deal with it. I'm not the best vegan though, and I admit it. I wear a long leather coat which I owned before I became an insufferable preachy vegan cunt. I have wool jumpers which I owned before I became an obnoxious holier-than-thou vegan twat. I had an egg-producing battery hen farm that I owned before I became a word A, word B, vegan, word C. A few weeks ago, I was mortified to discover that instead of buying my usual Kroger brand soy milk, which I exclusively use in my hot cups of tea, I had inadvertently brought Kroger brand organic milk, which pretty much has the same packaging. Now, I already had a hot cup of tea before I noticed this fact, so it was too late to return it. Naturally, I didn't just pour it down the sink because, like my dear old mum would say, there's starving baristas in the global south who are dying to have some milk for their lattes. Unfortunately, if I sent my slightly used organic milk to some starving baristas in the global south, it might have aged as well as the comedy stylings of Bernard Manning by the time it arrived. So I'm not a perfect vegan, but I am, in fact, a vegan in real life, and don't just say so for the purposes of comedy. Well, that's the preamble over. I suppose it's time to introduce the main subject of this episode. So, unclench your buttocks, sit back and relax, because it's story time with air quotes comedian. Imagine, if you will, that you are a decent human being. I know it's a stretch, dear viewer, but just imagine if you were for a few minutes. You're wandering around a cowshed, the heat of summer hanging like an oppressive weighted blanket that's also on fire, and you chance upon a calf that is near death and in urgent need of veterinarian care. Its weakly mooing in distress, flies buzzing around, the dried out feces caked around its hind end, its ribs clearly visible through its hide. Perhaps overhead, sensing that death is near, the vultures are circling like corporations circling the last resource that they can tear from the bones of Mother Earth. But there it is, discarded by the industrial farm where it has only known misery and suffering, discarded by an industrial farm that can't make $1 off of the sickly calf and won't even pay the $1 or so to end its life, instead just leaving it to die in its own shit. But there you are, dear viewer, a decent human being for the purposes of this scenario, looking at this sorry excuse for an animal that looks sorrier than you do upon waking up in a morass of your own vomit after a heavy night's drinking in Slough. You look upon this pitiful calf and decide to rescue it and take it to a vet. But oh no, you've just committed an act of eco-terrorism according to United States law. Far from being a decent human being, you're now a terrorist on the same level as the Taliban or ISIS or the CIA. You might think, okay, so why not call somebody about these inhumane conditions? Well, you could certainly do that, but you'd quickly find out that the authorities don't fucking care. Last winter, our neighbours had their dog chained up in their front yard, which is illegal here in Illinois. For a shelter, they had a heavily used trash can that they'd just emptied out and put on its side. Just imagine emptying a trash can, putting it on its side and calling it a day. Of course, you don't have to imagine it if you've ever stayed at a Motel 8. It had a water bowl, or rather a bowl with a block of ice in it, and from what I could determine, its food bowl was always empty. This dog cried all day and all night. Being that it's illegal to do this to your pet dog here in Illinois, I called the police. Hello police, who I think should be abolished. There are crimes going on at our neighbours. Tell us about the crimes. There's a dog chained up in our neighbour's yard, which is illegal here in Illinois. That particular kind of crime isn't a police matter unless the family is black. Are they black? No, they're Caucasian. Oh, well, we're not interested. Call animal control. So I called animal control and explained the situation. To be fair, animal control did do a drive-by, but that was the extent of their involvement. I called animal control and inquired as to why the dog was still in the yard. They said they were investigating, which sounds suspiciously like we're doing precisely fuck all about this particular illegal activity, but we'll spin you some bullshit to get you off our backs. So I called the ASPCA, and they referred me to animal control, and on and on. The moral of this story is the authorities don't care about animals, even though they pretend that they do. I considered taking some direct action on behalf of the dog in question, but ultimately didn't because sure as shit the SWAT teams and the FBI would have bum rushed me and thrown me into a prison where the conditions are roughly equivalent to an egg-producing battery hen farm I once owned. Now that the introduction is both over and largely irrelevant to what this podcast is actually about, we get to the meat and potatoes of the piece. Well, potatoes anyway. Gag Gag. What's that all about then, if not a truncated Popeye the Sailor Man chuckle? Let's get straight into it in the most roundabout way I can possibly think of. I suspect many meat eaters have this idea that while their steak did come from a cow, that cow spent its days grazing peacefully in the plentiful and verdant meadows of Newark, New Jersey, before one day laying down and peacefully going into that good night, and then, with the utmost respect, was parcelled up into various portions and shuttled off to the supermarket meat department. Let's call this version of events an episode of Friends. Of course, it should be noted that there was that one person on the internet who didn't understand why cattle existed when meat was readily available in the grocery store. Possibly the same person who stated, "I'm vegan, I eat meat, deal with it." But entertaining, ignorant idiots aside, that's the idyllic delusion meat eaters have. Just for a moment, try to imagine the reality of the meaty side of the industrial agricultural complex. I expect you realise that the reality is less an episode of Friends and perhaps more like an episode of Malcolm in the Middle. But still, despite being a bit grittier and true to life, as much as television can be, you still find it palatable. And that's just how the industrial agricultural complex likes it. And they are protected by anti-whistleblowing laws here in the USA, in Australia, in Canada and in France, because the actual reality of how animals are treated from birth until they are slaughtered is more like an episode of the fucking Holocaust, except for animals. Yeah, George Orwell's Animal Holocaust makes the Watership Down movie look like Peppa Pig. There'll be a callback near the end. I'm not going to go into the details of how animals are treated, right? Because we're here for some comedy. The fact, though, that these laws exist surely demonstrate that if Joe Public, or Josephine Public, or Joe Between Public were aware of the horrors going on behind the razor wire fencing of the industry, they would lose their fucking lunch. Quite literally, the industry would be completely fucked. So, peaceful animal activists, such as those from Direct Action Everywhere, are breaking the law when they film inside cattle farms, slaughterhouses and the like. They are labelled by the government as terrorists, even when the animal activists expose illegal activities, which, by the way, are fucking rampant within the industry, which should come as no surprise because apparently anybody who blows the whistle on illegal activities seems to find themselves up to their necks in shit, unless it suits some corporate end or some narrative advantageous to the government in power. With that in mind, I chinny reckon that instead of Direct Action Everywhere filming animal snuff movies in the farms and slaughterhouses of America, that instead they should make Hollywood action films. I like Hollywood action films. Everybody likes Hollywood action films. If you didn't get the callback, then count yourself lucky for never having seen an episode of Peppa Pig, which is Satan's own television. That's the end of this episode of the Polemics. Be sure to hit the dislike button and then piss off.